Kimura Takashi was dying incorrectly, not according to the customs of the Yakuza, not with a weapon in his hand, which at least could have been called worthy. He was dying on the concrete floor of a warehouse in the port district of Kobe, in a pool of his own blood, with a knife literally in his back, staring at the peeling ceiling. Takashi was 57 years old. 30 of them he had given to the Kuroda family. 30 years is not just a number. It is the first blood at 17, when he guarded someone else's cargo in the docks and received a knife across his palm, and the first lesson. Pain is a signal, not a sentence. It is the first corpse at 19, about which he did not think for more than 2 days, because there was no time to think. It is hundreds of small, dirty, invisible jobs that kept the organization afloat while the people at the top drank whiskey and counted money. He rose slowly. Without connections, without a wealthy patron, without the ability to play office games. Only through work. Only through results. Only through the fact that he always carried out what he was assigned, even when he was assigned things that a normal person would never take. The 29th year was a promotion. Kuroda Masami himself, the head of the family, summoned him, solemnly, with a staged speech about loyalty and devotion. He said, "You have risen above everyone who started beside you. You deserve it." Takashi stood and listened, and something in him that was still alive almost believed it. Then came the 30th year, a meeting in the warehouse with the top of the family. Champagne, conversations, congratulations. And a knife in the back from the man Takashi considered an ally, almost a friend, a man with whom he had worked side by side for 20 years. Noda Shinichi, 43 years old, sharp eyes, always smiling. He speaks quietly. "Sorry, Takashi," he said when Takashi sank to the floor. "You are too smart for our level, and too old for us to tolerate it." Masami stood aside and looked out the window. He did not move. He said nothing. That was worse than the knife. Takashi lay on the floor, and his thoughts did not go to the past and not to regrets. He thought about something specific, where he had miscalculated, where he had shown weakness, where he had allowed himself not to notice the signs. There were many of them, now he saw each one. I could have earlier, he told himself, almost soundlessly. The ceiling swam. Darkness came not as fear, but as fatigue. 30 years of dirty work, and no one came. No one. Then silence. The first sensation after the silence was smell. Not warehouse concrete, and not his own blood. Something alive. Cheap soap. Rice porridge. Smoke from a street grill from outside. The hum of an old fan. Takashi opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was yellow from age, with a crack in the corner that he had once sealed with newspaper. He knew that crack. He knew that ceiling. Slowly, he turned his head. A room 3 by 4 meters, an old mat on the floor, a cabinet in the corner with a cracked door, a small table with an electric hot plate. On the cabinet were cheap clocks in a plastic casing. Outside the window was a gray morning sky and the sound of the port. Takashi slowly sat up. Hands. He looked at his hands for a long time. They were different. Not old. Not with those knots and scars that he knew by heart. The skin was firm, without spots. The fingers were quick, as if they remembered not fatigue, but speed. Mirror. He stood up, felt how he stood differently, lighter, without the familiar pain in his back, and went to the mirror on the cabinet door. 27 years old. Not 57. A face he had not seen in the mirror for 3 decades. Without deep wrinkles, without the gray shade of skin, without that emptiness in the eyes that appears in a person after too much. The eyes were alive. Takashi stood and looked at himself. For a long time. A very long time. Then he turned around, sat on the floor, crossing his legs, as he always did when he needed to think without distractions. Year. Need to understand the year. He looked around. A newspaper on the table. He took it. The date. March 1994. Takashi lowered the newspaper. 30 years ago. This was the year when he was only finishing his first year of service. When Noda Shinichi was no one, a small middle-level clerk of the family. When Kuroda Masami still wore a human mask and smiled for real, not staged. When everything that would happen had not happened yet. Takashi closed his eyes. Inside there was something strange, not joy, not fear. Something cold and very even, like a tool that had been pulled from its sheath and wiped clean. Good, he said quietly, out loud, into the empty room. That means we begin again. Morning in the port district of Kobe was the same in any year. Seagulls. the rumble of containers, the smell of fish and machine oil, men in work suits or in cheap dark jackets that everyone wore here who did not want to stand out, and by that very thing stood out. Takashi walked down the street with his hands shoved into his pockets. He knew every point of this district, every corner, every establishment, every route. He knew where Kuroda's people stood, where the independent bookmaker worked, whom they had been protecting for 2 more years and then would crush under themselves, where Noda lived this year, where tomorrow's lower rank meeting would be. The head at 27 worked differently. He noticed this immediately. Thoughts were faster, reaction sharper. Muscle memory from 30 years had not gone anywhere, but the muscles were young. The difference was like an old master receiving a new tool, not learning again, but simply faster. He entered the first point, a cheap eatery that served as the unofficial gathering place for the family's minor ranks. 3 tables, a counter, an owner who pretended not to notice anything extra. Takashi sat down, ordered. A few minutes later, a man he remembered sat at the neighboring table, Tetsuo Baba, middle level, 29 years old in this period, self-satisfied, with a habit of pressing down on those below him. Takashi remembered him exactly like that. Baba stared at him. "Who are you?" "Kimura," Takashi said. "From the port department." "I don't know you." "I don't know you either." Baba narrowed his eyes. "Your voice is strange." Throat. Silence. Baba lost interest, as always when he saw no obvious benefit, and turned back to his food. Takashi ate and thought. At first, he did not plan to hurry. Haste in this environment smelled either of fear or ambition, and both smells attracted attention. He needed a position. Quiet, not arousing suspicion, but correct. He already knew the first step. He had to find Oga Keita. Oga Keita in 1994 was no one special. Among those who knew this was one person, Takashi, because in 8 years Oga would become one of the most influential people in the family. Not a boss, not a commander, better. He would become the financial mind, the man who knows where the money goes and where it comes from, the one without whose support no serious movement inside the family took place. Right now, Oga worked as an ordinary accountant in one of the family's front offices, a small freight logistics company. Takashi knew the address. He went there on the second day. Oga sat at his desk with the look of a person who was bored. 32 years old, neat, with a habit of holding a pencil in his fingers and tapping it on the table. "I need work," Takashi said. Oga raised his eyes. "There are no vacancies here." "Not here. I want to work in the field. I heard they are looking for people for night shifts at the port." Oga looked at him. "Are you already connected?" "No, but I want to be." "Why?" Takashi answered honestly enough, which always worked better than any lie. "Because in this city, without a family, you are either no one or a threat. Being no one does not interest me. Being a threat is unreasonable." Oga tapped the pencil. "You speak smartly." "I try." "Where did you work before?" "In Osaka." "Nothing serious." "Small jobs." Oga looked for about 3 seconds. "Name?" "Kimura Takashi." "Come in 2 days. I will tell you what was decided." Takashi nodded. Stood up. Leaving, he tossed a small coin at the edge of the table. Nothing significant. An old habit. In his first life, one person had once done the same for him, and it stayed in his memory. Oga looked at the coin. "What is this?" "For luck," Takashi said. "They say it helps." And he left. Takashi did not hurry to Noda. This had to be done correctly. Meeting too early would attract attention, avoiding him too noticeably as well. He first had to become part of the environment, a familiar face, understandable to the people around him. But he started watching immediately. Noda Shinichi this year had 13 years of service behind him, middle rank, known for being able to listen to conversations and never express an opinion first. Not a coward, a strategist. He knows how to wait. Takashi knew this on his back literally. The first time he saw Noda was in the 3rd week. A meeting of the minor ranks in a semi-basement bar in the Shimonoseki quarter. Takashi had already passed the initial stage. Ogu had given approval, and he had been assigned to night duty at the port. This was the lower level, the very lowest, from which everyone began. Noda came to the meeting not as a participant, but as an observer. He sat by the far wall, alone, with a small glass, and did not interfere in anything. Just watched. Takashi caught his gaze once, and immediately deliberately looked away first. It was an important moment. In the Yakuza hierarchy, meeting eyes was a language. Whoever looks away first acknowledges a lower status. Takashi was at the bottom. Looking away was correct. Noda nodded almost imperceptibly. That meant, saw? Remembered. Takashi sat, and outwardly was completely calm. Inside there was something quiet, sharp, very cold. Remember me. I need that. In the second month, he was given his first job. Not something important. Exactly the kind of first job usually is. Collect money from a debtor who had been avoiding contact for several weeks. The debtor's name was Hashimoto. A small trader, borrowed at interest, spent it in the wrong place, hiding. Takashi knew such people. He also knew Hashimoto. In his first life he had worked with him too. That man eventually paid, but over a year of hiding, he turned into a nervous tick for several people. Now everything would go faster. Takashi found Hashimoto on the third day. Not through informants, simply logic. A person who hides from money problems, but has not left the city, means he has something that holds him there. A relative, a girlfriend, a favorite place. Hashimoto went to the same eatery every Tuesday. Takashi came on Tuesday at 6 in the evening and sat at the next table. Hashimoto entered at 18:14. He choked when Takashi turned around. No need to run, Takashi said calmly. The chair here is comfortable. I will explain. No need. Sit down. Hashimoto sat down. How much can you give now? Half. When the second half? A month. I swear. Takashi looked at him for about 4 seconds. Good. Tomorrow you will bring half. To the same place where you took it. You won't. No. You need to return the money, not receive an injury that will prevent you from returning the money. This is just mathematics. Hashimoto looked at him as if at an alien. Takashi was not offended. He understood perfectly well what the man had expected. The money came the next day, in full. Hashimoto had apparently decided not to risk it with the second half. Takashi handed the money to Ogu. Fast, Ogu said. What is the point of dragging it out? Ogu tapped the pencil. You did not scare him. The money came. Usually they scare them. Usually then they hide longer. Ogu looked at him for a long time. Smart, he said finally. Just like the first time. Takashi understood that the beginning was working. The third month brought the first real clash. Not planned. Takashi was walking through an alley by the docks at 1 in the morning, the usual route after night duty, and ran into outsiders. Not locals. People from another family, which during this period was beginning to pressure Kuroda's port territory. 3 men, one with a chain on his neck, another with a crowbar behind his belt. They saw Takashi and understood. A family man. Alone. Hey. Takashi stopped. Looked. He was not afraid of 3. Not because he was fearless, but because 3 decades of work gave a completely different calculation of the situation. In this scheme, 3, with no obvious weapons in hand yet, an alley with exits on both sides, his advantage was that they did not know who they were talking to. Who are you with? The first said. Big, self-confident. No one, Takashi answered. You're lying. Check. The big one stepped forward. Takashi stood calmly. The second began to move around from the side, carelessly, too wide. The third remained behind. In his first life, Takashi would have taken a defensive position. Now he stepped forward. Sharply, earlier than the big one expected. A straight strike to the solar plexus without a swing, not with a fist, but with 2 fingers into the point under the sternum. The big one bent over in midward. At the same time, Takashi dodged to the left. The crowbar from the second passed by his shoulder. An elbow on the reverse movement into the second one's ear. He lost orientation. The third rushed in. Takashi did not move away from him. He stepped toward him, caught the hand, turned it around its axis. A painful wrist lock. The third fell to one knee. For seconds, all 3 were in different degrees of non-functionality. Takashi straightened up, adjusted his collar, looked at the big one. Tell your people, Kuroda's port is not yours. The big one wheezed. Tell them, Takashi repeated, without malice. Like a reminder. The big one nodded. Takashi walked on. Behind him came the sounds of people trying to get up. He did not turn around. The rumor reached Ogu a day later. Not as an official report, through the port chain of conversations. Ogu summoned Takashi. 3 of them? He asked. 2 didn't really manage to start. You did not say you could do that. No one asked. Ogu tapped the pencil. For a long time. What did they teach you in Osaka? Life taught me. That is not an answer. Takashi sat more comfortably. In Osaka, I worked for people who understood that physical work is not only strength. It is calculation. Names. Takashi named several real names that were in Osaka during this period and could be checked, but it would take a long time. Oga nodded. You are not rushing upward. Too early. Most new ones rush. Most new ones do stupid things out of impatience. Oga looked at him with an expression Takashi knew well. It was an assessment, not an impression, exactly an assessment, like that of a person who was used to thinking in numbers. I will keep you in mind, Oga said. Glad to hear it. This was the second point of support. In the 4th month, Takashi saw Kuroda Masami up close for the first time. Not personally, through glass. He came to a point in the port. Takashi stood inside. Masami got out of the car and spoke with Tetsuo Baba outside. In 1994, Masami was 48 years old. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that knew how to be both good-natured and absolutely cold at the same time. Not an evil man by nature, calculating. He did evil things without malice, simply because it was part of the mathematics. Takashi looked at him and felt something strange. Not hatred, it requires heat. This was colder. This was understanding. Masami betrayed him not because he wanted to, but because he saw a problem and solved it in the most convenient way. Takashi became inconvenient. Therefore, Takashi was removed. This could be understood. It did not mean forgiveness. Masami left. Takashi finished his tea. In how many years will I sit at this table opposite you? He thought. And what will you see in my eyes? Noda Shinichi appeared in Takashi's life in the 6th month. On his own. This was unexpected not by logic, but by timing. In the first life, they met later, through work. Here, Noda came to Takashi himself, which meant only one thing. Something had already changed. Kimura? Noda found him at the end of the night shift. Takashi turned around, looked at him evenly. Noda at 43 looked almost the same as at 53, sharp, attentive, with a quiet manner of speaking. The difference was in the details. Now there was not yet that self-confidence that appears in a person when he knows that his position is secure. Yes, I heard about you, Noda said. I want to talk. I am listening. Noda looked around. Not here. Tomorrow evening. Hibiki bar on the embankment. Good. Noda nodded. Left. Takashi stood and watched him go. Inside was that same coldness. Interesting. You came yourself, Noda. This time you. Hibiki bar was a place where those who wanted to talk without witnesses talked. Not a back room. Just a corner table, far enough from the counter, close enough to the exit. Noda was already sitting when Takashi arrived. 2 glasses. Noda had ordered in advance. Sit down. Takashi sat down. Noda studied him for several seconds. You are too calm for a newcomer. The too nervous ones do not last long. Smart. Noda took his glass. Oga speaks well of you. That is pleasant to hear. Ogu rarely speaks well of people. Takashi waited. Noda did not hurry. I have a job, he said finally. Small. Delicate. It requires a person who knows how to think and does not ask unnecessary questions. What kind of job? One of our partners is playing a double game. Passing information to people from the north. This needs to be confirmed. Not acted upon, only confirmed. Surveillance? Careful. Why not through your own? Because my people know this person by face. You do not. Takashi thought for 2 seconds. Who knows about this assignment? Noda raised an eyebrow slightly. Why is it important? Because if the assignment is delicate, extra ears are harmful. 2. Me and 1 more. Who? You do not need to know. Takashi nodded. Good. Tell me the details. He accepted the assignment. Not because he trusted Noda, but because it gave closeness. Working together with Noda meant seeing him from the inside. Seeing how he makes decisions. Seeing whom he serves above himself. Everything Takashi did in the first months was one big collection of information. Not a revenge plan. Not a plan for rising. Simply information. Because a person with good information at the right moment is worth more than an army. He understood this in his first life too late. The observation target was named Tamura. 51 years old, manager of one of the family's official businesses, a small chain of fish restaurants on the embankment. A plausible cover. A good place for meetings. Takashi worked for 3 days. He did not hurry. Route, habits, contacts, where he goes in the morning, where he has breakfast, whom he calls from the phone booth by the station. It was a routine he knew better than his own habits. On the 3rd day, he saw the meeting. Tamura entered a small eatery near the fish market and spent an hour there with 2 people whom Takashi photographed with a small cheap camera. Not northern families. More interesting. One of the 2, Takashi recognized the face after another day of studying, worked for government officials who at this time were engaged in pressuring organized crime. Tamura was cooperating with the authorities. Not with competitors, with the authorities. Takashi sat in his room in the evening and looked at the photographs. This was more interesting than Noda expected to learn. Because if Tamura works for the authorities, they know more than the family thinks. And someone in the family knows this. Possibly exactly the one who gave the assignment to Noda. Or possibly Noda himself. Takashi carefully laid the photographs out on the table. Thought. What to give Noda and how to give it was a separate decision. The full truth gave Noda too much. The partial truth gave Noda exactly what would not harm Takashi, and created a debt. He chose the second. The meeting with Noda was in the same eatery. Takashi laid out the observations carefully, precisely, with photographs, without his own interpretation about the authorities. Noda listened without interrupting. Then he looked at the pictures. These are not Northerners. No. Do you know who they are? No. Unfamiliar faces. That was a lie. The first direct lie to Noda, and Takashi remembered the moment. Noda did not check, he accepted. Good work, he said. Glad to hear it. You may not tell anyone about this. Of course. No one, Noda repeated. Quietly. With the intonation Takashi knew. It was not a request. I understand. Noda took the pictures. I will remember this, Kimura. Good. They parted. Takashi walked down the street and thought about something specific. Noda wanted to hide the information, which meant he knew more than he showed. Tamura worked for the authorities. Someone in the family was covering it. Noda was exactly the kind of person who had reasons to keep this knowledge under control. This meant, in a few years, Noda would become the one who would have leverage over several people at once. That was exactly why, when Masami chose who would remove Takashi, the choice fell on Noda. Because Noda knew how to do unpleasant things without traces. Takashi stopped by the pier. He looked at the water. Now I know your method, he thought. You collect information that others want to hide. Then it becomes your protection and your weapon. A good strategy. Only now I have 30 years of information. And I know who you will become before you yourself have understood it. Time passed. Takashi did not hurry. This was harder than it seemed, not physically, but mentally. Seeing people who would cause harm years later, working beside them, smiling in the right places, required a discipline deeper than ordinary patience. But he had discipline. By the end of the second year, he already held a middle position in the port department, a small step, but the right one. He was respected for his work, not for connections. Oga mentioned his name from time to time in brief conversations in the right places. Noda used him twice more for delicate matters. Each time Takashi gave him part of the truth. Never all of it. One evening in October 1995, a person he did not expect sat down beside him. Not Noda, not Ogu. Someone else. Young, about 25, thin, with short-cropped hair and the gaze of a person used to looking through people. You are Kimura? He asked. Yes. My name is Asano. I am from Masami-san. Takashi set down his glass. Inside, even in calm. Outside, the same. I am listening. Masami-san has heard about you. He wants a personal meeting. This was earlier than Takashi had planned. Much earlier. In his first life, he had met Masami only after 8 years of service. Here, after 2. Something had changed. When? Takashi asked. Tomorrow. Good. Asano stood up. Left. Takashi sat and thought. Masami wants to see him after 2 years, which means someone has already described him in such a way that Masami is interested. Ogu or Noda. Most likely both. This meant the position had already been created. Then he could go. Masami's house stood on a hill outside the city. Not huge, neat. A Japanese garden, closed gates, guards with neutral faces. Takashi entered without a weapon. They searched him at the gate. He went inside. Masami received him in a room overlooking the garden. He was exactly as Takashi remembered him, only 12 years younger. The face was still less refined. There was still something alive in it, the thing that would later disappear under layers of power. They sat down. Masami was silent for several seconds. Oga says you think differently, he said. I do not know how others think. Differently for this work. Work requires different things at different times. Masami smiled slightly. Noda says you know how to keep silent about what is necessary. That is a good quality. Depends on whom you serve. That was precise. Masami in 1995 still tested people through conversation, not through deeds. Later he would stop doing that. It was his weakness, which Takashi had noticed in his first life, but had never used. I serve the one I said I would serve, Takashi answered. Until I am given a reason otherwise. And if you are given one? Depends on what kind of reason. Masami looked. An honest answer. Lying here is pointless. Silence. Then Masami nodded. Good. Asano will introduce you to one matter. We will see how you think in more serious work. Takashi bowed. Stood up. Leaving, he stopped at the door. Masami-san, he said. One question. Speak. The person who recommended me. Did he recommend only me? Masami raised his eyes. Why do you ask? If several people were recommended, I will work differently than if I was the only one. A long pause. Masami looked at him with a new expression, not evaluating. Something else. Only you, he said. Thank you. Takashi left. And only beyond the gates did he allow himself to exhale. Because Masami's answer was an honest answer, and that said a lot about who he was now. Which meant he could still work with him. For now. That same evening, Takashi sat by his window. The port below worked as always. Noise, light, movement. He thought. In his first life, he had been a tool. Useful, reliable, precise, and exactly because of that dangerous at the moment when he became too smart. Tools must not be smarter than those who use them. Now he was different. He knew the ending, knew the names, knew the methods. Noda collects hidden information, builds a network of invisible debts. Now he has 13 years of service, and he does not yet feel protected. In 5 years he will. Masami is calculating, intelligent, but attached to the loyalty of those he trusts. His weakness is that he stops trusting people too late. Ogu is an honest financier by nature, who works for the one who values him. He can be made his own. Truly, Asano is young, loyal to Masami now, but in years will begin to seek more. The turning point is specific. Takashi remembered when. Takashi looked at the port. 30 years ago, he began here with nothing. Now he was beginning again with 30 years of knowledge about people, events, weak points, and exact moments. This was not revenge. Not revenge yet. This was work. Long, delicate, precise. Like a clockwork mechanism that is assembled not to show beauty, but to fire precisely at the right second. Kimura Takashi closed the window. Lay down. Folded his hands under his head. And for the first time in a long time, in this life or in the previous one, he fell asleep without the feeling of loss. Takashi woke up 10 minutes before the alarm clock. It was an old habit that had survived 2 lives. The body was young, but the brain still lived according to the routine of a person who had slept with half an eye open for too long. He sat up on the tatami, massaged his neck, and for several seconds simply listened to the silence. Silence in a cheap apartment is always deceptive. It does not mean peace. It means the noise has not started yet. He stood up, did a short warm-up. Shoulders, wrists, lower back, a step to the side, a turn of the torso. The movements came easily, almost too easily. It annoyed and pleased him at the same time. In his previous life, the body resisted. Now it obeyed. On the table lay a phone. An ordinary one, with a gray handset, which almost everyone now carried who was in any way connected with business and the street. The call came exactly at 7:30. Kimura, Oga said briefly. Today at 10. There is a matter. What type? Not over the phone. Understood. And a short pause. Dress properly. Takashi smirked. So the matter is higher than usual. Exactly. The call cut off. Takashi put down the handset and looked out the window. Below, the city was already moving. Cars, workers, loaders, couriers, people with coffee and paper cups. The city lived as if nothing changed. Takashi knew that this was the most dangerous delusion. Everything changes. It is just that some understand it later than others. The office to which he was summoned was not in the port and not in one of the family's usual fronts. It was the second floor of an old business building in central Kobe, outwardly an ordinary supply firm, inside a neat, clean territory of the Kuroda family. Not luxury. Control. Takashi entered through the main entrance. The guards already knew him. This was a good sign. And a bad one. Good because they had begun to see him as their own. Bad because such things are always recorded by someone above. 3 people had gathered in the room. Oga Keita, Noda Shinichi, and Asano. This was unexpected. Takashi entered, bowed to each in order. Sit down, Oga said. Takashi sat down. Oga placed a folder on the table. Northern route. Warehouse intersections. One of our shipments has disappeared on the way for the 3rd time in 2 months. Takashi looked at the folder, but did not touch it. Who is responsible? Formally, the warehouse company. Unofficially, Matsuda's people. Matsuda. The name clicked somewhere in Takashi's head. In his first life, this man would surface only years later. Back then quiet, smiling, almost invisible. In the end, one of those who at the right moment would begin pulling resources to the side. And what is needed from me? Takashi asked. Oga looked directly. Find where the leak is. And who inside is holding the door open. Noda spoke for the first time. You have the necessary quality. You do not hurry, but you do not sleep. I like that. Takashi looked at him. Thank you. Noda nodded slightly. And one more thing. This matter must not get out. If Matsuda is guilty, he must be caught without noise. And if it is not him, then even better. It means someone higher. The word higher hung in the room. Takashi understood that he was already being led towards something larger than ordinary logistics. This was a trial approach. Someone was checking whether he could be given something that smelled of internal politics. Asano sat silently and looked at him the way one looks at a useful tool that does not yet need to be explained. Deadline? Takashi asked. 10 days, Oga said. Understood. You will take one person with you. Who? Oga looked at Asano. Him. Takashi turned his head slightly. Asano was young, at that moment still underestimated, but already too fast. This was an interesting decision. It meant they wanted to see how Takashi worked not alone. Good, he said. Asano turned out not to be useless. Takashi noted this on the very first day. The young one knew how to keep pace and did not ask stupid questions. While he observed, he was silent. When he asked, it was to the point. They began with the warehouse. The place was old, near the port, with a concrete yard and several chains of containers. On paper, fish, equipment, boxes of electronics, and repair parts passed through it. In reality, also everything that the family wanted to move without unnecessary eyes. Takashi did not act head-on. First he checked the schedule, then the people, then those who worked the night shift, then who left earlier, who stayed late, who accidentally ended up where he was not supposed to be. After 2 days, he noticed a pattern. The disappearances happened neither at loading nor at unloading. At the intermediate stop, the cargo did not reach the main resorting hub. This meant one of two things. Either the vehicle was opened on the way, or someone was leaking information about the route. Takashi pointed it out to Asano on the map. Look, the latter leaned in. If here, Takashi ran his finger along the route line. The cargo disappears not here and not here, but here. That means the access point is with the drivers or with the coordinator. Asano nodded. Or both. Yes, but one of them gives the start. They went to the drivers. A check without threats, without pressure, just conversation and observation. 2 were clean. The third was too nervous. Not guilty, but nervous, like a person who knows that a problem is growing near him, but does not know who created it. Takashi remembered him. 3 hours later, he was already standing at a phone booth and making a call to a number that in this life should not have been known to him at all yet. The number belonged to a small office in the suburbs. In his first life, this address would surface later. Now too early. Takashi understood. Someone was rushing. At night, they returned to the warehouse. Without an official assignment. Only Takashi, Asano, and one old driver whom Takashi had managed to buy off with silence and money. They hid in an empty room between containers. They waited. At 1:40 in the morning, an unmarked van drove up. 2 men got out of it. One opened the rear door. The second went to the warehouse through the side entrance. Asano was about to move ahead of time, but Takashi stopped him with his hand. Wait. The second man went inside. The second stretched. Then the light of a flashlight flickered inside. And then Takashi saw what he had been waiting for. Not theft. A transfer. The one who had entered left a small envelope in the gap between pallets and took the same kind. An exchange of information. This is not cargo, Asano whispered. No. They waited another 20 seconds. When the man came back out, Takashi moved. Not simply forward, but to the side, along a low arc, so as not to get into the direct line of response. He struck the first one in the elbow, hitting the hand with the flashlight. The flashlight fell, light lashed across the floor. The second managed to turn. Asano was already on him. Fast, hard, almost beautiful, a knee to the body, a grip on the collar, a turn. The second collapsed onto the concrete. The first tried to pull out a knife. Takashi saw the movement before it began. Intercepted the wrist. struck with the base of his palm under the jaw. The man staggered back, but the knife still appeared. And that was when Takashi understood that the first man's face was familiar to him. Not by name, by the manner of standing. He was one of the people he had once seen beside Noda. "Don't touch," the first shouted. Takashi struck once more into the solar plexus, briefly, so as not to kill. The knife fell out. Asano held the second one to the floor. "Alive?" he asked. "For now, yes," Takashi answered. He crouched by the first one, picked up the fallen envelope. Inside was not money. A list of routes, names, dates, and one short note. "Give to SH, Shinichi. Noda." Takashi looked at the paper and for the first time in this life felt not cold, but real fire. Because this was not just cover. This was a thread. Until this moment, he had only had a general plan. Now he had the first direct trace. In the morning, Takashi brought the find to Ogu. Not directly to Noda. First to Ogu. Because Ogu was the person who knew how to listen to facts, not emotions. This was important. Ogu read the papers silently. Then again, "This is serious," he said. "Yes. Why, Shinichi?" "I do not know yet. But the list of routes is not going outside. It is being distributed inside the family." Ogu raised his eyes. "You understand that if this is true, then—" "Yes," Takashi answered. "This is no longer a warehouse." Ogu tapped his finger on the paper. "Who else knows?" "For now, only us and the people at the warehouse." "Good. No one." "Of course." Ogu set the folder aside. This could be a blow to several people at once. "Exactly." Ogu looked at him for a long time. "You often end up in the right place." Takashi did not answer immediately. Then he said, "I simply look well." Ogu nodded. "Asano says you almost never make mistakes in small things." "Almost. He has not yet caught you on the full truth." Takashi allowed himself a barely noticeable smile. Then he was looking badly. Ogu chuckled. It was the first time. A small, almost imperceptible softening. And then Takashi understood. Ogu was beginning to consider him his own. A week later, Noda summoned him again. This time late in the evening, to a small tea house beyond the port line. A place where conversations are heard only by those who have been specifically permitted to hear them. Noda sat alone. Takashi entered. Noda smiled as always, politely, almost friendly. "Sit down." Takashi sat down. Noda poured tea. "I heard you managed an interesting move in the warehouse matter." Takashi looked at him calmly. "I heard you have many rumors. Rumors are the blood of the family. Sometimes it's rot." Noda looked at him more attentively. This was too direct a remark for the lower level. Takashi saw how Noda noted it. "Do you always speak like that?" Noda asked. "Only when there is a reason." "And what reason is there now?" "When cargo leaves along routes that someone is handing over from the inside. And then in the papers the list is also addressed to you. Those are no longer rumors." A pause. Noda set down the cup. "How do you know it is addressed to me?" "I do not know. I assume." "Assumptions are dangerous." "Incorrect ones, yes." Noda looked at him with an unclear expression. Then he asked quietly, "Are you afraid of me?" Takashi met his gaze. "Should I be?" Noda smiled wider. "You did not answer." "I am not afraid of people who speak directly." This was dangerous. He knew that, and Noda knew it. But that was exactly why he said it. If Noda had already begun to feel Takashi as a separate value, then he could not simply be left as a boy from the port. "Good," Noda said. "Then keep working. And do not tell anyone about what you found. I will decide myself how to use it." Takashi did not answer immediately. There it is, he thought. Noda is no longer just checking. He is beginning to claim control. "Understood," Takashi said aloud. "Good boy." When he came out of the tea house, the wind from the bay struck his face. Takashi stopped on the street and slowly exhaled. He could almost see how history was beginning to diverge along a new trajectory. He knew there would be fights ahead. Not possibly would be. There would be. If he wanted to reach the top earlier than in his previous life, there was no way to avoid blood. Which meant it was not enough to be smart. He had to be dangerous. Takashi began training. Not as a sport. As survival. In the mornings, running along the embankment. At night, practicing strikes in an empty warehouse. A simple sandbag, a rope, old gloves. He struck at different levels, changed the angle of attack, worked on his legs. The body remembered a great deal. Plus youth. It was almost unfair. One night Asano caught him. "Do you always work like this?" he asked, leaning against the door jamb. "When there is time. You do not fight like a newcomer." Takashi continued hitting the bag. "And how does a newcomer fight?" loudly, sharply, and with a lot of excess. Then I am not a newcomer. No, Asano shook his head. You are old. Takashi stopped, slowly turned around. Asano stood calmly, without challenge. It was not mockery, a statement. Old in the head, Asano added. Not in the body. Takashi looked at him for several seconds. Is that an insult? It is an observation. Good. Asano walked to the bag. Let me try. You want to hit? I want to understand what you were doing. Takashi stepped aside. Asano struck. Not bad, but too straightforward. Takashi intercepted his arm, turned the elbow, stepped back. Here is the mistake. What? You put in force before you enter the position. Asano snorted. Say that again so that I understand. Takashi slowly repeated, showing the angle of movement. Asano watched, then nodded. Fine. I understand. Takashi noticed then, Asano was not just listening. He learned quickly. This was a good and dangerous sign. The outsiders came again a month later. Not to the warehouse, but to a bar under the family's cover, where minor workers and intermediaries usually had lunch. Takashi noticed them first. 3. One of them was the same one who had been at the warehouse. The others were new, but it was clear from their faces, not locals. He sent a signal to Oga through the bartender and went out after them himself. The street was narrow. Good. The 3 turned into an alley. Takashi followed them at a distance. And that was when they turned around. They were waiting for him. Kimura, the first one said. Takashi stopped. I do not know you, but we know you. The second was already holding his hand under his jacket. The third stood slightly behind, blocking the exit. Takashi assessed the scheme immediately. 2 options. Either they would kill him now, or they would try to take him away. He took a step forward and struck first. Not in the face. In the knee. Short, hard. The first one collapsed. The second pulled out a knife, but Takashi was already inside the distance. A strike to the forearm, breaking the trajectory. Then his shoulder into the chest. The third rushed from behind. Takashi went down, rolled, and rose already with someone else's knife in his hand, torn from the second. After that, it was quick. 3 bodies on the narrow street, the sound of breathing, short groans. He stood with the knife in his hand. The first, curled up by the wall, whispered, Noda will not leave. Takashi froze. It was not just a threat. It was a mistake, because Noda could no longer control everyone acting around him, or someone was deliberately trying to drag his name in. Takashi crouched beside the wounded man. Who sent you? The man only smirked. And you haven't figured it out yourself? Takashi looked at him, and at that moment understood there was another level of the game. Someone had begun moving people in such a way as to frame Noda, or to test Takashi, or to push them into a clash ahead of time. He did not finish him off. Too noisy. Too early. He simply stood up, put away the knife, and left before his own people arrived. The next day, Noda summoned him himself. His tone was dry. You were in a fight. Yes. Serious? Enough. Noda looked at him for a long time. One of the attackers said my name. Yes. Do you believe him? Takashi met his gaze. I believe that he knew it. Noda did not answer immediately, and that was alarming. Because in such situations, Noda usually quickly inserted his smile and changed the subject. Now he did not. You understand that things are beginning to spin around you that are not yet at your level? I understand. Then why not step back? Takashi was silent for a while, and then he said what he would never have said to this man in his first life. Because I am tired of being someone who can be thrown away. Noda looked at him for a long time. A very long time. Then he stood up and went to the window. You know how to say dangerous things, Kimura. Only if they are true. Truth does not always help here. I know. Noda did not turn around. I will give you one more job. Closer to the upper circle. Takashi froze. There it is. What kind of job? Escorting my man to a meeting with outside intermediaries. Why me? Because now I want to see how you behave beside those who look down from above. Takashi understood. This was not a reward. This was selection. If he handled it, he would gain closer access. If not, he would lose trust. Understood, Takashi said. And one more thing. Noda turned, his face calm, but his eyes no longer entirely friendly. Do not think that because I am promoting you, you owe me. Takashi bowed. I do not think that. Noda smiled. We will see. The meeting was in an old warehouse on the outskirts of the Osaka highway, with outside intermediaries, a group of people working through commercial channels. This was not a world where everyone walked around with pistols and shouted. Here they smiled, shook hands, and sold information. Takashi accompanied Noda, 2 others as well. He stood slightly behind, as was proper for a person who did not yet speak first. The conversation was about supplies, debts, and redistribution of routes. Takashi listened and quickly understood that Noda was deliberately leading the conversation on the edge, pressing just a little, yielding just a little, checking who would falter where. One of the intermediaries was more dangerous than the others. Short, bald, with a soft voice. It is exactly such people who are usually dangerous. They do not threaten, they record weaknesses. He looked at Takashi. Young man, are you one of Shinichi's people? Takashi did not answer immediately. Noda turned his head slightly. A test. Yes, Takashi said calmly. Then you surely have a good memory. Enough. I heard you work quickly with your hands. Takashi smiled barely noticeably. Sometimes hands are faster than words. The intermediary nodded. A good answer. Noda silently watched. The folding conversation continued for another 20 minutes. Then, at the moment when everyone had already begun to disperse, the intermediary made a mistake, small but fatal in terms of observation. He checked the inner pocket of his jacket too quickly, as if something lay there that he was afraid to lose. Takashi noticed it. Later, when they went out, he said quietly to Noda, he had an envelope. Noda did not answer right away. You saw it. The movement. Right pocket, when you spoke about the routes. Good. Is that important? Very. They walked to the car. Noda opened the door and suddenly said, I like you, Kimura. Takashi stopped half a step. This was more dangerous than any threat. Noda noticed. Not the way you think. As a person who sees what others do not see. Takashi was silent. Noda got into the car. But that may become a problem if you begin to think that you understand more than there is. The door closed. The car drove away. Takashi remained standing on the road and understood that for the first time Noda was not just testing him. Noda had begun to look closely at him seriously. And that meant one thing. His place was already changing. The next month, Takashi received a summons from Ogu. He looked more serious than usual. There is an internal leak, he said. I know. Do not hurry. Not the kind we thought. Matsuda is not the main problem. Takashi raised his eyes. Ogu placed another folder on the table. The leaks are going through people connected with medical supplies. Takashi was silent. This was already serious. Medicine is not the port, not food, not logistics. It is the blood of the family. If it leaks, it is not just goods that leak, but power. Who? He asked. Not everything is clear yet. But the threads converge at several points. And one of them is too close to Noda. Takashi pretended that this did not touch him. But inside, everything became very even. There it is. The real line. If he made a mistake now, Noda would either notice, or someone near him would feel that Takashi had crawled too close. What do you need from me? A check of one nursing warehouse. On the night shift. Unofficially. And very quietly. Do I go alone? No. Asano will go with you. Takashi nodded. Oga looked at him strangely. You are not surprised. I stopped being surprised. Bad. For whom? Oga did not answer. The warehouse was small. White walls, the smell of alcohol, marked boxes, guards at the door. This kind of warehouse was exactly what was dangerous. Everything here looks clean. Takashi and Asano entered with an official pass. Inside there was no one except the night pharmacist and 2 guards. They did not press immediately. Takashi asked to see the issue log. The pharmacist, nervous, too careful, led them to the table. Asano stood by the door. Takashi flipped through the log and saw it. Not one anomaly. 3 identical batches written off twice. First as delivered to the hospital, then as spoiled. But the warehouse mark for actual departure did not match. Who entered the records? Takashi asked. I, and another manager, the pharmacist answered. Name? Sato. Takashi nodded. Where is Sato now? The pharmacist turned pale. I do not know. And at that moment, a door slammed outside. Then another. Asano sharply turned. Takashi instantly understood. They had not been expected by chance. It was a trap, but not for killing, for detaining. Exit. He threw out. But it was too late. From the left, 2 men with iron clubs came out of the corridor. From the right, 1 more. Asano pulled out a knife. Takashi took the first blow on his forearm, stepped forward, and struck the nearest one with his elbow in the throat. He wheezed and stepped back. The second swung the club. Takashi dove under the blow, shoulder into the body, knocked him onto the boxes. Asano was already fighting the third. This was no longer a street clash. This was a tight fight indoors. Short blows, hard angles, limited space. Takashi felt the concrete under his feet, boxes at the sides, breathing nearby. Someone tried to come in from behind. He threw him back with a strike to the knee, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed his head into a metal cabinet. Asano worked beautifully, 2 quick movements, and the third collapsed. But one of the guards snatched out a short knife. Takashi saw the gleam, and then he did what no one expected from him. He did not retreat. He entered the attack, straight at the blade with a turn of the body and a palm strike to the wrist. The knife went past. The next blow to the nose, then a knee to the stomach. The guard bent over. Takashi took the knife and stepped back. Silence. The pharmacist sat on the floor in the corner and trembled. Asano breathed heavily. This was too well organized, he said. Yes, that means someone from inside. Takashi looked at the log and suddenly saw a name repeating in several places. Sato. Not just a manager. He was the person through whom the extra batches were going. He took from the log an inserted sheet, a short note accidentally caught between the pages. Only 2 things were written on it. Passed to Shinichi-san, and below, when the inspectors come, detained Takashi stood holding the sheet and felt everything shifting in the right direction. Someone really was dragging Noda toward the center. But the question was who and why. That evening, Noda summoned Takashi himself. Against everything, personally, without intermediaries. They met in a small private room above a bar. Noda stood by the window, not sitting down. You found a connection? He asked. Takashi placed the sheet on the table. Noda read it. Nothing changed in his face. But Takashi noticed, for only a fraction of a second, how his fingers tensed. This is not mine, Noda said. I am not accusing you. But you think so. I think. Noda turned. And what do you think? Takashi met his gaze. That someone wants Shinichi's name to appear in the papers more often than necessary. Silence. Then Noda slowly smiled. Too evenly. You are smarter than you should be. I have been told that. And by whom? Different people. Noda took a step closer. Tell me honestly, Kimura, do you work for me? Takashi did not look away. It was a dangerous question. I work for the family, he said. That is evasion. That is an answer. Noda looked for a long time. Then he smirked. Good. Today you are free. Takashi turned toward the door. And then Noda said quietly, very quietly, do not crawl where you are not expected. Takashi stopped for a second. Did not turn around. Too late, he said, and left. A week later, Takashi figured out Sato. Not directly. He simply understood where the chain was breaking. Sato was not the main one. He was intermediate. That meant they needed the one covering him. And that person turned out to be Matsuda. The same point that at the beginning had seemed like a weak link suddenly became important again. Takashi understood the scheme. Matsuda and Sato worked for one upper connector. And Noda in this line was not necessarily guilty, rather a convenient point whose name could be used. But where in this scheme was the one who would stick a knife in Takashi's back in the future? He did not yet know. He only knew that someone had already begun building a net around him. And if he did not begin tearing it now, later it would be too late. Takashi chose the evening. He did not take many people with him. Asano, yes. 2 others, no. Too noticeable. Sato lived in a cramped apartment near the commercial district. Takashi and Asano waited in the car opposite. Are you sure? Asano asked. No. Then why are we here? Because if you wait for certainty, you can die where you stand. Asano looked out the window. Do you always talk like that? Yes. And does it work? So far, yes. Sato came out of the house at 21:10. Alone. On foot. This was a bad sign. People who do not expect danger go out without looking around. He looked around twice. Now? Asano asked. Yes. They moved. Not running. Quietly, like a shadow that knows the route. Sato turned into an alley. Takashi sped up. He noticed them too late. Stop, Takashi said. Sato turned pale. I do not know what you know. Asano had already stood to the side, blocking the exit. Sato jerked. Takashi took a step forward and pinned him to the wall with one hand. Who else? I don't. A blow. Not to the face. To the ribs. Sato bent over, exhaled. Who else? Takashi repeated. Matsuda. Further. Sato trembled. I only passed them on. I did not know. Takashi looked at him. There were options. Break him now. Take him. Drive him away. Do everything officially. But there was no time. To whom exactly did you pass the notes? He asked. Sato raised his head, and at that moment, Takashi heard a sound. Not from behind, from the side. Footsteps. Many. They had not come alone. Takashi sharply turned around. 3 men were entering the alley. Too fast. And one of them was already holding a short crowbar. Takashi understood instantly. This was not just Sato's backup. This was a cleanup. The one who was about to talk had to be removed. Asano, he shouted. It began. Takashi took the first blow on his forearm. The crowbar slid along his jacket. Pain flared, but the bone did not crack. He answered at once. A step sideways, a strike to the throat, then a knee to the stomach. The opponent wheezed and sank down. The second came with a knife from above, too wide. Asano crashed into him from the side, knocked him into the wall, but was hit in the shoulder himself and staggered. The third was the most dangerous, large, heavy, with a short chain in his hand. Not a newcomer. He swung the chain at Takashi. Takashi stepped inside the distance where the chain was inconvenient and drove his elbow into his chin. He did not fall, but lost his rhythm for a fraction of a second. That was enough. Takashi's knife entered his thigh shallowly, but enough to deprive him of stability. The third collapsed onto one knee. Asano was already finishing his own. Sato tried to crawl away along the wall. Don't move, Takashi said. He froze. The alley filled with the sounds of breathing and quiet groans. One of the attackers was alive, but not dangerous. The second unconscious. The third with a knife wound. Takashi approached Sato. Who sent you? Sato was crying. I don't know. Honestly, they only told me the place. Who? Sato looked over his shoulder. Takashi turned around too late. From the roof of the neighboring building, someone threw a bottle. The glass shattered nearby. And at that same instant, the light of car headlights struck the alley. A car. Not the police. Too fast. Takashi understood. Another group. Not cleanup, support. They wanted to take them all. He grabbed Sato by the collar. Asano, we're leaving. They ran through the side exit, leaving the bodies behind. Behind them, shouts were already sounding. They hid in an empty garage by the embankment. Asano bandaged his shoulder. Takashi the cut on his side received during the first strike. Nothing fatal, but this was already a warning. Sato sat on the floor and shook. Talk, Takashi said. I can't. You can. They will kill me. Takashi crouched in front of him. If you do not speak, you will die now. If you speak, there is a chance. Sato looked at him with the eyes of a cornered animal. Then he exhaled. Not only Matsuda, he said. There is one more. He is not one of ours. Name. Sato stumbled. I only heard Matsuda call him. Ito-san. Takashi froze. Ito. Not Noda. Noda was a piece on the board, but not the one standing behind the threads. Ito-san. Right now this name said almost nothing. But Takashi knew that in the future this very man would become one of those who would begin pushing through the restructuring of the family's internal flows. Not a boss. Not a loud player. Quiet. Too quiet. Are you sure? He asked. Yes. Yes. I heard. Takashi slowly stood up. This was no longer just observation. This was the beginning of a real hunt. He remembered the name Ito-san. Not as a powerful man. As a murky one. In his first life, this type did not shine. Did not stand at the top. But exactly such people often move the most dangerous deals quietly, through others' hands. At the moment of betrayal, they appear nearby, and then disappear before anyone has time to connect them with the dirt. Now he had been noticed. Takashi sat in the darkness of the garage and laid everything out in his head. Matsuda, intermediate. Sato, channel. Ito-san, the connecting link, not yet in official power, but already acting. Noda possibly not the core, but part of the mechanism. Masami still at the top, which meant that if Takashi wanted to change the ending, he needed not simply to rise. He needed to figure out who in the early years was building the future trap. Because a knife in the back is not one person. It is a system, and that means the system must be broken before it becomes strong. He rose, looked at Asano. Tomorrow we go again. Where? To Ito. Asano was silent for a while. Do you know where he is? Not yet. Then how? Takashi looked at him. First through Matsuda, then through the people who are afraid to say Ito aloud. Asano nodded. Understood. He did not ask further. That was good. The next day Takashi went not to Noda and not to Ogu. To a man named Kawada. Kawada was the type who always knows a little more than he says. In his first life, Takashi did not immediately understand that Kawada was dangerous not through strength, but through connections. He held 3 small channels of information and knew how to sell them little by little to different people, leaving himself room to maneuver. Now Takashi came to him in a small bar where Kawada liked to drink during the day. "I need Ito," he said at once. Kawada smirked. "What am I, a directory? You like being useful. And you decided that today?" Takashi sat opposite him. Matsuda is connected with him. Kawada's face did not change, but his eyes did, for a fraction of a second. That was enough. "I do not understand what you are talking about." Takashi placed on the table not everything. "Only a copy of the note, only part of it. I am not asking for free. I know you have a debt to Ogu, and 2 more to people who dislike inspections." Kawada fell silent. "Where did you?" "It does not matter. What matters is that I can either forget or remember." Kawada looked for a long time. "You are a dangerous type, Kimura. Finally, we agree on something." Pause. "Ito does not like it when his name is spoken aloud," Kawada finally said. "Especially beside Matsuda." "Where is he?" Kawada shrugged. "There will be a meeting in 2 weeks. Unofficial. At the old warehouse by the river." "Who will be there?" "Not everyone who should be, but someone important." Takashi looked at him. "Thank you." Kawada snorted. "Don't thank me. Just don't you dare say later that I helped you." "I won't say it." He stood up and left. Outside, the air was damp after the rain. Takashi walked along the street and felt everything inside becoming clearer. For the first time, the real target emerged before him. Not the abstract idea of rising, but a concrete cleanup of the line that stretched toward betrayal. 2 weeks is little when one needs to become someone, and a lot when one needs not to make a mistake. Takashi worked, trained, gathered information, and acted so that Noda did not see too much. It was difficult, because Noda had already begun pressing with attention. He summoned him more often, gave small assignments, watched his reaction. Once he even offered to drink in an informal setting. Takashi went, because refusing would have been worse. Noda sat relaxed, like a person who had everything under control. "You are growing quickly, Kimura." "I work. It is visible. But growth attracts attention." Takashi was silent. Noda poured him more. "I heard you were interested in Matsuda." Takashi raised his eyes. "Heard that from whom?" "From a person who should not have heard it. Which means the rumor is moving." This was a warning. Takashi understood. Noda was checking how close he had gotten, and how well he knew how to hold the line. "I am interested in any losses of the family," Takashi said calmly. "If Matsuda is involved, I must know." Noda looked for a long time. Then he smirked. The right answer. But there was no longer the former softness in his eyes. Takashi noticed it, and understood. Noda had begun to suspect that Kimura knew more than he should. This was dangerous. That meant he had to act earlier. The warehouse by the river was not just a warehouse. It was a place used for meetings between branches of the family and external channels. Half abandoned, with poor lighting, but convenient for people who do not like cameras and witnesses. Takashi arrived first. Asano with him. They took the upper flight of the old staircase and waited. Below, people were already gathering. Matsuda, 2 unknowns. And the third, there he was. Ito-san. Takashi saw him for the first time. Middle-aged, neat suit, calm face, almost boring. The most dangerous people often look as if they should not be here at all. Ito said something to Matsuda. He nodded. Then Ito turned his head slightly to the side, as if he had sensed someone's presence. Takashi did not move. He could not. It was still too early. Below, they discussed supplies, redistribution of cargo, an additional channel through the northern warehouses. Ito spoke little. But when he spoke, everyone listened. That was the most important thing. Takashi understood. It was he, not Noda, not Matsuda, who already held part of the threads even now. And that meant he had to become the first big blow. And then the unforeseen happened. Matsuda noticed something behind the door and sharply turned around. At that same second, 2 men in unfamiliar clothes burst into the room. Not from the family. With weapons. Not the police. Not external partners. Competitors. A massacre began. The first shot. No, not a shot. A blow of a metal pipe against the door, and then a scream. The people below rushed to the sides. Takashi did not wait. He jumped down from the stair, landing straight into a turn, onto his feet, with a short roll. Asano jumped down after him. One of the attackers was already going at Ito. Takashi crashed into him from the side, struck him in the ribs, tore away the weapon, then turned and blocked the second blow with his elbow. Ito stepped back, his face unchanged. It was even irritating. Matsuda screamed, "Who is this?" No one answered. The second attacker was going at Matsuda, clearly not out of fear, but according to a list. Takashi understood it immediately, so this was not a coincidence. Ito was being deliberately set up to be hit. Someone wanted to remove several figures at once and leave alive only those who could be controlled. Takashi and Asano crashed into the general chaos. Asano took one on himself, working fast and hard. Knee, hold, strike to the neck. Takashi took the second, threw him off balance, hurled him into the boards, finished him with an elbow to the back of the head. The boards creaked. Someone grabbed Matsuda by the collar and dragged him toward the door. Ito did not run. He retreated evenly, like a person who did not want to show fear. But Takashi saw the main thing. Ito was not looking at the attackers. At the exit, he knew more than he said. Takashi went toward him. "Ito-san," he shouted through the noise. The man turned, and at that exact moment, one of the attackers struck the warehouse support. The structure cracked. The boards where people stood began to crack. "Move out," someone shouted. But it was too late. Beams showered down from above. Takashi grabbed Ito by the sleeve and yanked him to the side. For the first time, Ito looked at him with real attention. And that was bad, because now Ito had remembered not just a junior. He had remembered the man who had pulled him out from under the blow. And having remembered, he would begin to think. They got out of the warehouse through a side passage. Around them, cars, sirens, people, shouts were already gathering. Too noisy. Takashi did not linger. But on the way to the car, Ito suddenly said, "You do not look surprised." Takashi looked at him. "I have been in warehouses long enough." "Not about that." Ito stopped for a moment. "Did you know something would happen here? I knew there would be pressure here. And now I know who stands closest to the center." Ito looked attentively. "You are smart. So are you." Ito smirked. Smart people sometimes survive longer than the rest. Takashi did not answer, because at that moment he understood Ito had not ended up under attack by accident. He was being tested. Someone was checking whether he would withstand it. And if yes, then he could be moved further. But who? Matsuda? No, too small. Noda? Possibly, but not only. Masami? Too early, too high. That meant there was someone else. Someone who was building a more complex scheme inside the family than everyone else noticed. Takashi clenched his teeth. He needed a name. That same evening, Noda summoned him. And this was no longer a coincidence. Takashi entered. Noda sat, quiet, collected. "You were at the warehouse by the river." Takashi did not deny it. "Yes." "And saved Ito." "Yes." Pause. "Why?" Takashi understood the question. Noda was not asking about motivation. He was asking, "Why did you end up there, and why did you act as if you knew what was happening?" "Because I was placed there," Takashi said. "Who?" "You." Noda looked attentively. "And what did you find?" Takashi answered carefully. "People who are too sure they will not be seen." Noda smirked. "That is not an answer. That is exactly the answer." A long pause. Then Noda stood up. "I will give you a task that no one will like." Takashi tensed. "What task?" "One person will need to be brought in. Not killed. Brought in. Alive." "Who?" Noda named the name. Takashi froze for a second. Because this was a man whom in his first life he had seen only in a photo. One of the future internal liaisons. The one who would later become the key to falsifying several family decisions. Now still young, still harmless looking. But it is exactly such people who become snakes. "Understood," Takashi said. "And one more thing." Noda stepped closer. "If you begin acting without my knowledge, I will know." Takashi met his gaze. "I know." "Good." Noda smiled. And for the first time this smile did not seem friendly to Takashi. It was an assessment, a test, and even a threat. After leaving Noda, Takashi stopped in the darkness of the street. Everything was too fast, too early. He was already almost at the internal level of the family. He had the first threads in his hands, and at the same time, a map that was too complex was beginning to gather against him. He knew the main thing. Ito was not just a figure. He was a link. Noda was not the top. He was one of the masters of control. Masami was still the head, but in his circle there were already people ready to change the arrangement. And Sato, Matsuda, the warehouse by the river, pressure, setups, all of this was not separate events. It was testing the system. For the first time in this life, Takashi felt that he was not simply walking along a familiar road. He was walking along a road that the very fact of his presence had already begun to change. This was dangerous. This was exactly what he wanted. The name of the man Noda ordered him to bring was Seiki. Outwardly, a worthless intermediary. Inside, a future channel for redistributing money and information. One of those who smile until they receive power and then become difficult to remove. Takashi watched him for 4 days. Found out the route, habits, contact points. On the 5th day, he took Asano with him. Alive, Asano reminded him. Yes. Then do not break him too badly. I will try. Asano looked at him. That is a bad joke. It is not a joke. They waited by the parking lot near a small office. Seiki came out at 18:20. Looked around. Felt it. Takashi moved. Not running. Calmly. Seiki tried to go toward the road, but Asano had already blocked the left side. Takashi approached directly. Seiki. The man turned pale. What do you need? To talk. I don't. You will come with us. Voluntarily. Seiki turned around, tried to strike him in the face, but Takashi knocked him down with his elbow and led him toward the car. He began to resist. Takashi struck him in the body, briefly, so as not to break him. Alive, Asano said quietly. I remember. They loaded Seiki into the car. Seiki sat in an empty room in an old garage. Not tied up, not yet. Just under guard. Takashi sat opposite him. Who do you work for? He asked. For the family. Name. I do not understand. Takashi placed a photo on the table. Seiki turned even paler. Matsuda, Takashi said. Ito. Who else? Seiki was silent. Takashi did not raise his voice. You will come under attack if you stay silent. If you speak, maybe you will survive. I don't. You are already involved. The only choice is how deeply they will drown you. Seiki trembled. Then he began to speak. Slowly, haltingly, with gaps. And the further it went, the more the name that surfaced struck Takashi. Not Noda, not Masami, but a man from the inner circle, who in the future line would become the one to give the sanction for cleansing old assets. The name was not the loudest. That was exactly why Takashi remembered it. Kano Ryoji, a quiet, almost unnoticed advisor, who right now did not yet hold a top position, but was already holding conversations about inefficient old men, about renewing the structure, about how some people had lived too long on old schemes. Takashi sat motionless. There it was. Not just a traitor. The one who creates the ideology for the knife. When Seiki finished, the room became very quiet. Takashi looked at him and thought. In his first life, he had seen Kano only from afar. A man without thunder, without showy strength. Not a fighter, not a killer. But exactly such people are dangerous. They legalize murder with words. Repeat it, Takashi said. Seiki repeated. Kano Ryoji. Connection through Matsuda. Intermediate routes. Connection with Ito. Control over the papers. People who could be removed when they became inconvenient. Takashi stood up. His heart beat evenly. Too evenly. He had finally seen the shape of the betrayal as a whole. Not the knife that had been stuck into his back, but the hand that had prepared that knife. And that hand was still young. For now, that means it can still be cut off. That same night, Takashi went to Ogu. Not to Noda. Ogu sat in his usual place, with a pencil and papers. You look as if you have found a problem, he said. Takashi placed the list in front of him. Ogu looked for a long time. Then he raised his eyes. This is serious. Yes. Are you sure? Completely. Ito, Matsuda, Kano. Ogu slowly repeated the names. This is already a piece of the upper circle. Yes. And you brought this to me. Because you know how to listen to facts. Ogu thought. If this is true, the family will begin gnawing itself apart. If nothing is done, yes. And if something is done, then there will be only one cutter, not 4. Ogu slowly set down the pencil. You have become dangerous very quickly, Kimura. I always was. It is just that before, no one was looking. Ogu was silent for a long time. Then he said, I will help you, but only if you tell me exactly what you want. Takashi looked him directly in the eyes. I want to reach the very top before they decide that I am already too old. Ogu slowly inhaled. And for the first time in all this time, he did not try to turn it into a joke. You are not joking. No. And you understand what that means? Yes. Then you are not simply working against them. You want to build a new structure. Yes. Ogu nodded. This is no longer a pocket fight. I know. Good. He stood up, went to the window. Then we work smarter. At dawn, Takashi understood that he was being followed. Not amateurishly. Professionally. One man in a gray coat, who had appeared before him 3 times on different streets. Not one route, not one point. Changing angles. Takashi did not speed up, did not turn around, simply noted it. So his people were already being checked by Kano's people, or Noda himself, or someone else. This was good, because now he knew for certain he was being taken seriously. And if so, the next step had to be more painful. Not for Takashi, for them. In the evening, he came to the place he had chosen himself. A small cafe by the old tram line. Almost empty. 2 tables, one owner who did not care who paid. Takashi waited. Then a man came. Not Noda, not Masami, but familiar. Kano Ryoji. Quiet, neat, with soft manners and eyes in which almost nothing was reflected. He sat opposite him. Kimura, he said calmly. You are an interesting man. Takashi did not answer immediately. Kano continued. You have risen too quickly for a newcomer, and too precisely for a coincidence. Have you come to assess me? It looks as if I came to ask. And what will you ask? Kano smiled barely noticeably. Why do you look as if you know how everything will end? Takashi looked at him, and understood that this was the first time he stood face to face with the one who in the future would become one of the main architects of his downfall. He smiled in return, almost imperceptibly, because I know how to look farther than the rest. Kano was silent. Then Takashi added, and sometimes that is enough to survive. Kano continued to look, then slowly stood up. You are very dangerous, Kimura. Thank you. That is not a compliment, and I do not take it as one. Kano nodded. Then let us see how far you can go. He left. Takashi remained sitting. And for the first time in this life, he had not just a goal. He had an enemy. A real one. One who could be pulled into the light only in one way, by becoming higher than him. Takashi returned home at night. Sat down on the tatami, took off his jacket. His body hurt after the whole week. Not strongly, but enough to remind him of itself. He liked that. Pain meant that everything was still happening. He thought about Kano. About Noda, about Masami, Ogu, Asano, Ito, about people who did not yet know that they already stood on the future line of downfall. 30 years ago, he had been someone who could be betrayed without consequences. Now that was not so. Now he knew the names, knew the approaches, knew the future fears, knew where each of them would leave a vulnerability. He lowered his gaze to his own hands. Young, strong, ready. This time, he said quietly into the empty room. I will not become the one they leave to die. Outside the window, the city hummed. Takashi lay down and closed his eyes. Ahead was not just a struggle for a place. Ahead was a war for the very top of the family. And the first blow had already been struck. Takashi understood a simple thing. One person can rise quickly, but he will not be able to hold on at the top without those who stand beside him. In his first life, he had only assignments and dirty work. In this life, he was going to build not a ladder, but a support. First, he called Asano. Not to a bar, not to an office, to a small 24-hour noodle shop, where no one asked unnecessary questions, and where there was enough noise so that the conversation could not be heard 2 tables away. Asano came on time, sat opposite him, took off his jacket, ordered tea. You look as if you are about to kill someone, he said instead of greeting. Takashi answered calmly, possibly. Asano smirked. Honest. I need you to work for me, and not just beside me. Asano's smile disappeared. You are already speaking like a man above your rank. No, I am speaking like a man who does not want to die a second time. Asano looked at him for a long time. You are strange, but you have results. Is that enough? For me, yes. For the others, no? Takashi nodded. That is exactly why I need people who look at results. Asano took a sip of tea. What kind of work? First, gather those who do not like being pawns. Then understand who in the family is already ready to come over to our side. And only then strike. Asano narrowed his eyes. Our side. If you do not like that word, you can call it something else. But the essence will not change. Asano was silent for several seconds. Then he said, I do not like Noda. Takashi nodded barely noticeably. That is already a good beginning. The second person was Kawada. He had to be taken carefully. Not with pressure, with respect. Kawada was one of those who constantly balances between fear and profit. For such a person to choose a side, he needs to be shown that the gain in perspective is higher than the risk. Takashi met him in the same bar where they had spoken earlier. Have you come for information again? Kawada asked. No. For a person. Kawada snorted. That sounds dangerous. It is. Takashi placed a short record on the table, Not names, not lists, but several dates and routes that he had already compared. For lines converged at one point. Kawada looked and stopped smiling. Where did you get this? From the places where you yourself do not like to poke your nose. Kawada slowly set the paper aside. This is no longer a joke. And not a game. Who do you want? You. Kawada raised his eyebrows. I am not a fighter. And you are not needed as one. Then why? Because you know who is connected with whom. And also because you know how to disappear when things get hot. I need a person who can gather rumors without putting himself under the knife. Kawada looked for a long time. You want to make your own network? Yes. And you think you can climb into the upper part of the family and not be crushed? Takashi answered calmly. I have already seen how it ends when a person makes a mistake. Kawada fell silent. Then he smirked a little crookedly. You speak as if you have already gone through it. You could say that. Kawada finished his tea. Fine. I will think about it. Do not think for long. Why? Because in a week movement will begin, and then it will already be too late to choose a comfortable side. Kawada looked at him with the expression of a person who only now understood that this was not about a local fight. You are climbing high. Otherwise there is no point. 3 days later, Takashi gathered them all. Not a large group, too early, but enough for it to already become something, and not a coincidence. Asano, Kawada. 2 people from the port whom Takashi trusted more than the others. 1 liaison from Ogu, who came unofficially and stayed silent all evening. And 1 more person, young, dry, with a face on which it was written that he did not like power, but loved order. His name was Hiraga. Takashi chose an old and simple place, an abandoned warehouse by the embankment. There they could speak without unnecessary eyes, and if something went wrong, at least there would be somewhere to retreat. He stood before them and did not try to pretend to be the main one. He simply spoke. The family is rotting inside, not at the street level. Inside, there are already people who are moving money and routes for themselves. Noda is not the cause, but part of the mechanism. Matsuda is an intermediary. Kano is the man who creates justification for purges. Ito is the link between the top and the bottom. No one interrupted. Takashi continued. If we simply follow orders, we will be used. If we start climbing without a plan, we will be torn apart one by one. That means a structure is needed. Hiraga raised his eyes. And you think you can do it? Yes. Why? Because I already know how this will end if we do nothing. Kawada smirked. You know how to sound frightening. Good. Takashi unfolded a paper diagram on the table. Not a city map, a diagram of connections. Who calls whom? Who owes whom? Who crosses paths with whom? Who fears whom? Who listens to Noda? Who passes through Ito? Who is under Matsuda's control? It was not just a map. It was the skeleton of a future war. Asano looked silently. Did you gather all this yourself? He asked. Not all of it, but enough. And what next? Takashi raised his eyes. Next, we stopped being convenient. The test came earlier than expected. That is exactly how it happens. As soon as you build a line, the world tests whether it can withstand the weight. The next day, one of the warehouse vehicles used for the family's cover burned down. At night, no casualties, but with heavy damage. They immediately pinned it on the competitors. But Takashi saw something else. Too clean, he said to Ogu at the meeting. Ogu frowned. Explain. If it had been competitors, they would have struck the warehouse or the people. Here, a car. This is a signal. Someone wants to show that they can reach our logistics without escalation. And these are not competitors. This is inside. Ogu was silent. Then he asked, who? Takashi did not answer immediately. Not because he did not know. Because he understood. If he said the name now, it could burn too early. Better to make the person come out into the light himself. I want a couple of days, he said. For what? To draw out the one who did this. Ogu looked for a long time. Are you sure you can? Yes. What are you risking? That I will be noticed ahead of time. Ogu nodded. Act. Takashi began with a trifle. He spread a rumor that one of the warehouse shifts had failed on the documents, and someone above was now looking for the guilty. Unofficially, through Kawada, with a hint that the inspection would go through the chain. 12 hours later, a man from the office came to him, short, nervous, with hands that did not know how to lie calmly on the table. He offered to help sort it out. Takashi immediately understood this was the entry point. Not the main player. A liaison. The one who carries dirty papers where they need to go. He did not grab him immediately. First he let him show more. A meeting in a cafe. A conversation about documents. Names. A couple of routes that did not match reality. False signatures. Takashi recorded everything in his head. After 3 meetings, the liaison had already begun to grow more nervous. At the 4th, Takashi asked directly, "Who told you about the inspection?" The man froze. "No one." "Wrong answer." "I just heard." "From whom?" The man was silent. Takashi placed a sheet in front of him. There was only one name on it. Ito. The liaison turned pale. And that was when Takashi understood that he had pressed the right point. "I did not want to." "I know. But now you want to talk." The man swallowed. "It is not Ito-san, not exactly. Through him it goes." "Who?" "Kano." Takashi's face did not change. But inside, everything fell into place. Kano. Again. There was the source of the wording, the convenient purges, the proper justifications. Now it was possible to go on the attack. Not on everything at once. On the first link. Kano could not be taken crudely. Such people do not fall from fists. They hide in papers, in conversations, in benevolent smiles, and in other people's hands. That meant he had to be brought into a situation where he would reveal fear himself. Takashi decided to strike through a document. He fabricated a leak, as if one of Kano's people had passed old route lists to external intermediaries. It was not a loud move, a quiet one. The kind that would cause not a scandal, but an internal inspection. Kano had to come himself. And he came. To a small conference room in a side office of the family. Takashi stood in the corridor together with Ogu and Asano. He did not enter immediately. He waited. Through the thin partition, voices could be heard. Kano spoke calmly, almost softly. "If the lists surface, it will not be a blow to me. To the whole system. That is exactly what raises questions," someone higher answered. Takashi froze. Masami himself was inside. So the move had worked deeper than planned. Oga tensed. "What is happening there?" Asano asked quietly. Takashi did not answer. The door swung open. Kano came out first. His face was calm, but no longer serene. In his eyes was anger that he was hiding too poorly. Masami stood behind him. Large, cold, displeased. He saw Takashi and stopped his gaze. "You," he said. Takashi bowed evenly. "Masami-san. Who started this?" Takashi raised his head. "I did." Silence. Ogu turned his shoulders slightly, as if preparing to intervene, but did not. Masami looked for a long time. Why? Because someone inside is moving documents and setting up the lower links. If this is not stopped, the family will lose not only cargo, but people. Kano took a step. "This is absurd." Takashi looked at him. "Then explain why so many lists converge on the same routes." Kano smiled. Too calmly. "You think too much for someone who has not yet risen." And at that moment Takashi understood that Kano had recognized him too. Not the face, the style. That very gaze that sees too far. This was bad. Very bad. Because now Kano had begun to consider Takashi not just useful, but a dangerous competitor. Masami interrupted the silence. "Kimura, you are under observation. If your words are false, you will answer." "I understand. And if this is an attempt to play big politics ahead of time." He did not finish. He did not need to. Takashi bowed. "I am ready to answer if the inspection finds an error." Masami looked into his face for several more seconds, then left. Kano lingered for a moment. "You are very bold," he said quietly. "No," Takashi answered. "I simply do not intend to be old when I am betrayed." Kano froze. Even Masami turned around for a second. But Takashi already understood. The phrase had hit the target. Kano remembered it. And that meant the game had become personal. The inspection arranged by Masami did not have time to end calmly. Because that same night someone tried to remove the liaison whom Takashi had managed to crack. Takashi learned about it from Kawada. "They are looking for him," he said, bursting into the room without knocking. "Kano's people, and, it seems, not only them." "Where is he?" "Hiding. But they would have found him if they knew where to look better." Takashi stood up. "Then we go now." "Where?" "To the warehouses on the outskirts." "Are you sure?" "Yes." They went with Asano and 2 more people. The night was damp. Streetlights reflected in puddles. The city seemed to exhale. The liaison was hiding in an old cargo block, but 3 men were already going there. Not family people. Outsiders. Takashi had exactly 1 moment to decide. He chose a direct entrance. Asano left. The man rushed. Takashi forward. One of the outsiders turned around and only managed to raise his hand. Takashi's strike landed on his forearm, then an elbow into the jaw. The The second with a short club took a hit to the knee and collapsed. The third pulled out a knife. Asano grappled with him almost at the same time. This was no longer a short alley and not an office fight. The warehouses gave space and echo, but also danger. Metal, concrete, boxes, narrow passages. Takashi felt the blood quickly accelerate through his body. Alive, strong, real. He struck his opponent in the body, then in the throat, then knocked his head against the rusty corner of a container. The man sank down. Asano was already pressing the second. Kawada, who had stayed slightly behind, unexpectedly threw a metal box into the darkness. The noise distracted another attacker, and that was enough for Takashi to get behind his back. A minute later, everything was over. The liaison, dragged outside, trembled and could not speak. Takashi looked at him. Who wanted to remove you? The man exhaled. I do not know, but they said that if I started talking, Kano's man would take me. Takashi closed his eyes for a second. That was enough. Kano had already begun cleaning up the tails. The next morning, Takashi sat before Ogu again. New papers lay on the table. Connections, routes, numbers, several names. Ogu looked silently for a long time. Then he said, You have come very far in a short time. This is not a short time. For most, yes. Takashi was silent. Ogu folded the papers into a stack. If all this is confirmed, there will be a blow inside the family. Otherwise, they will strike us first. Yes. Ogu looked into his eyes. Why are you doing this? Just do not say it is for the family. Takashi did not smile. I am doing this because I know what happens when it is too late. Ogu exhaled. Then he stood up, went to the board with the working diagrams, and slowly erased the old line. Good, he said. Then we changed the game. He wrote a new name in the center. Kano Ryoji. Then added below Ito, Matsuda, Noda. Takashi watched. This is already an open board, he said. Ogu nodded. Yes. And now you are not just a piece in it. Takashi turned to him. Then what am I? Ogu thought for a second, then answered. For now, a person who knows how to place pieces where they are needed. It was almost an admission. That same day, Takashi found himself closer to the upper floor than ever before. Not literally in terms of access. He was summoned for a short presence in a room where internal security was being discussed. And Masami was there too. Takashi entered, bowed. Masami looked at him, not hiding his interest. Kano sat slightly to the side. On his face was the same politeness, but now there was tension in it. Noda was silent, as always, but Takashi noticed. His position was changing too. He already understood that Kimura was moving too quickly, and he did not know whether this was a friend or a problem. That was good. When people do not know how to classify you, they make mistakes more often. Masami spoke. Kimura, you claim that there is a leak inside the system. Yes. And you have specific names? I have chains. Some names are already confirmed. Others require one more check. Kano smiled. A lot of words for a man of low rank. Takashi looked at him. A lot of falsehood for a man who talks about order. Kano's face changed barely noticeably. Masami raised his hand. Enough. Silence. Are you sure this is not just a struggle for influence? Masami asked. Takashi answered honestly. It is a struggle for influence too. But if we do not stop it now, we will lose much more than influence. Masami looked for a long time, then nodded. Continue the work. Kano said nothing. But Takashi saw, very briefly, that he already hated him. And that was useful, because hatred makes people make mistakes. After this event, everything went faster. Not sharply, but noticeably. People began to see Takashi differently, not as simply a useful executor, as someone who was already participating in things that until then had concerned only the top. This was both a gift and a threat. Asano said to him in the evening, Now you cannot be hidden back anymore. Takashi sat, sewing up a fresh tear on his sleeve. And there is no need. Do you really want to go all the way to the head? Yes. Why? Takashi looked at him. Because if not me, then someone like Kano will again decide who can be called old too early. Asano was silent. You still speak as if you can see the future, he said. Takashi smirked. Sometimes it is useful. 2 days later, Kawada came himself. For the first time without jokes. Sat opposite Takashi and said, I am coming over to your side. Takashi did not answer immediately. Why? Because Kano's people are already asking too many questions. And because you turned out to be right about Noda and Ito. And when a person turns out to be right too often, it is better to follow him than to stand against him. Takashi nodded. Smart. I have always been smart. No, you were careful. That is not the same thing. Kawada snorted. Fine. Then consider that a careful smart person has decided that you have chances. That is already better. Kawada placed a small notebook on the table. There are contacts there. Not all of them, but enough to move a couple more doors. Takashi took the notebook. Thank you. Don't mention it. If you drown, I will pretend I was not nearby. Reasonable. They both smirked. But now Takashi knew. He already had not only working hands. He had the first people ready to go with him, not out of fear, but out of calculation. This meant that the path had become real. The blow came not with a fist, with a document. Takashi used the liaison they had pulled out of the warehouse and brought out part of the forwarding scheme. Not all of it. Exactly enough for traces of Kano to surface in the papers. Noda tried to wave it off. Ito fell silent. Masami called a closed meeting. Kano entered the room as calm as always. But Takashi saw. Under the calm there was tension. Very thin. When the papers were placed on the table, the room became quiet. Masami leafed through them slowly, then raised his head. Is this true? Kano smiled. Part of it is a forgery. Takashi had expected this in advance. Then explain why 4 routes converge on the same people? Kano turned to him. You are sticking your nose too far. I am sticking it where you have already started digging a grave. The phrase sounded sharp. Even Masami fell silent for a second. Kano lost his expression for the first time. And that was exactly what mattered. Because now everyone saw. He was not stone. He could crack too. Enough, Masami said. He stood up, looked at everyone in turn. Check everything. Quietly. If there is dirt, pull it out. Kano tried to say something, but Masami was no longer listening. And at that moment Takashi understood. The first cracking blow had passed. Now the main thing would begin. The night after the meeting was quiet. Too quiet. Takashi stood by the window of his apartment, looked at the port, and understood that everything was moving toward a point where it would no longer be possible to return the past. He did not feel victory, only movement. And that was right. Because in such stories, victory does not come on one date. It comes through a series of blows, through people who remain, and through those who fall. He heard footsteps behind him, turned around. Asano, do you think they have already moved against us? He asked. Yes. Kano, including him. And Noda? Takashi was silent for a second. Noda is still watching where the wind will turn. Asano nodded. And you? Takashi smirked. I have already chosen a side. And I do not intend to lie on the floor anymore and wait until someone decides that I am too old. Asano looked at him for a long time, then nodded briefly. Then I am beside you. Takashi turned back to the window. Below, the city burned. Wet, dark, alive. And somewhere in that city, the next wave was already being prepared. But now he knew its names.